This is a live view of United Launch Alliance's new Vulcan rocket on Launch Pad 41 at nearby Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It will launch a spacecraft that will land on the moon, making it one of the first lunar landings for the U.S. since the final Apollo mission over 50 years ago. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the Space Coast of Florida. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and you are watching the first launch of NASA's CLPS initiative. CLPS is short for Commercial Lunar Payload Services, a model in which NASA contracts space on commercial missions to send science and technology to the moon. These deliveries will mean more exploration of the moon than ever before and will help us prepare for the first woman and first person of color to land on the lunar surface under NASA's Artemis program. For today's launch, NASA selected Astrobotic to deliver its 5 lunar instruments. This is the first mission for the Peregrine spacecraft. Today is also the first launch of ULA's new Vulcan rocket, so a lot of firsts today. Now we have a 45-minute launch window that opens at 2:18 and 38 seconds Eastern Time. But you'll notice that clock on the upper left-hand corner of your screen. It says T-minus 7 minutes. That's because the ULA team is in a planned hold. Basically, they baked extra time into the countdown to make sure everything's good for launch. You'll see that clock start to count down again when we are actually 7 minutes to the opening of the launch window. Thank you, Amanda. It's great to hear that 85% go for tonight. Now let's take a closer look at the Peregrine 1 spacecraft. It's about 6.2 feet tall and 8.2 feet wide, made mostly of aluminum and carbon fiber. The 4 landing legs have a honeycomb design on the inside to absorb Peregrine's touchdown on the lunar surface. Its solar panel is mounted to the top of the spacecraft. The payload decks at the center will carry 20 payloads from 7 countries. And finally, it has over 1 mile of cables and wiring. Our broadcast on NASA TV today will cover Peregrine separation around 3:09 a.m. Eastern Time, followed by acquisition of signal shortly after. For more on the company that built Peregrine, here's Astrobotic's Olivia Chapla.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'm Olivia Chapla, and I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here representing Astrobotic as the Director of Marketing and Communications. We're a small but mighty team of about 260 people. Together, our real goal is to make space accessible to the world. And today, we are particularly focused on the moon. Astrobotic built the Peregrine spacecraft as part of our fleet of lunar landers designed to deliver cargo, called payloads, to the moon's surface. Over the past 3 years, I've watched the Astrobotic team build this Peregrine spacecraft launching today. I've been there alongside them during the long days, late nights, and for the ridiculously early mornings when we shipped Peregrine to Cape Canaveral in preparation for launch today. I am personally so excited to be here because this mission really marks the beginning of a historic time. The United States hasn't soft landed on the moon since NASA's Apollo program more than 50 years ago, and only a handful of countries have ever successfully landed on the lunar surface. Astrobotic's aim is to not only return the American flag to the moon again with Peregrine, but also to start regular commercial lunar deliveries to the moon's surface. Now, let's hear a little more from our founder and CEO, John Thornton.
Astrobotic's goal is to make space accessible to the world, and what that means to us is making it possible for space agencies and commercial organizations and ultimately the individual all around the world to access the moon in ways that have never been possible before. The big thing that we're known for is our 2 lunar missions to go to the surface of the moon. Our first one is about to launch, and our second one flies in 2024. Astrobotic already has a wide array of contracts from rovers and landers, and now the beginnings of power systems that can be deployed on the surface of the moon. So we are not only thinking about lunar delivery, we're thinking about the next step. We're thinking about rovers that can drive. We're thinking about power systems that can deploy and provide sustaining power at the poles of the moon. These are all of the pieces that we need, the infrastructure that we need to take our next step, to make the moon a place that we can sustain and live and have astronauts do science and exploration, and one day use the resources of the moon for in-space purposes and perhaps eventually bring those resources back to Earth. Pittsburgh startups, and space startups in particular, are not supposed to succeed. You're supposed to be in Florida, you're supposed to be in Houston, you're supposed to be in LA, but yet here we are in Pittsburgh with our very first spacecraft on the launch pad, ready to go. We have more than a dozen instruments flying on our very first mission from all over the world. 6 new nations will touch the surface of the moon with just our first mission. This mission was done on a relative shoestring budget. This is a much more affordable mission than has historically occurred. Regardless of challenges, we have to continue to strive toward that future of making space accessible to the world and to see what's possible when you come together to overcome the biggest challenge of all, landing on the surface of the moon.
Astrobotic is among a pool of vendors that can bid on contracts for future NASA deliveries. This model will hopefully mean frequent, rapid, and affordable access to the moon.
Our moon. It seems so close in the night sky, but getting there is really hard. But what if there was a way to change that? Only a few nations have successfully landed on the moon. As NASA sends astronauts back to the lunar surface, this time to stay, we will need to send science and technology instruments ahead of time to lay the foundation for human exploration. To make this happen, NASA is helping establish a commercial lunar economy. For the first time ever, there will be commercial delivery services to the moon. We are enabling American companies to send our payloads to the lunar surface for us. These delivery services will expand our capabilities for exploration, radically increasing the amount of science we can achieve. This high-risk, high-reward initiative will invest in and leverage the entrepreneurial spirit of American innovation to launch a commercial lunar marketplace, advancing technology and exploration for all of us. With this never-before-seen streamlined access to the moon, we will be able to make novel measurements and develop technologies that scientists have long wanted to do on the lunar surface. And as this new industry matures, this commercial delivery service for NASA and other customers could expand beyond the moon to other destinations in our solar system. And we can learn to live on another world because we are explorers.
All right, so let's head back over to ULA's Amanda Sterling for another update on the Vulcan rocket.
Things continue to go as planned as we look forward to the launch of ULA's first Vulcan rocket. We're still holding at T-minus 7 minutes as part of our planned 60-minute hold, and the team is not working any issues at this time. The Vulcan booster is fueled to flight level with super chilled liquid oxygen and liquid methane. Soon, Centaur topping to flight levels will begin, and the ULA team is on track for an on-time liftoff at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern. We're about 5 minutes away from Space Launch Delta 45's final weather briefing. At the moment, our weather continues to look good through the 45-minute launch window we have available this morning. The excitement is building here in ULA's Advanced Spaceflight Operations Center as we get closer to T0. Back to you, Megan.
All right, we're about 35 minutes away to the opening of today's launch window. Inside Vulcan's payload fairing is Astrobotic's Peregrine spacecraft. Astrobotic is based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where folks there are laser focused on Peregrine right now. Right, Olivia?
That is definitely right, Megan. I'm checking in on our Peregrine lunar lander with our mission control team right now. You can see them on screen. A reminder that our spacecraft is currently sitting in the top of ULA Vulcan's fairing. Our flight director is informing me that Peregrine is looking nominal with temperatures currently at an expected 70 degrees Fahrenheit. We also monitor the environmental pressures around the spacecraft, and we're sitting at a good 14.7 psi. Things are looking good for launch. The spacecraft is currently powered off, but will automatically power on once it separates from Vulcan's payload fairing. And here you can just see the faces of some of the engineers who have worked many hours on Peregrine to get it to the launch pad today. Sitting in the middle left row is Flight Director Anders Solorzano. He is the acting flight director for this launch. And nearby is Alex Van Hoven. He is currently providing us updates on the spacecraft status. And Alex just informed me that the spacecraft is currently looking nominal. Temperatures and pressures are still as expected. As we continue to await launch, let's send it back to Megan at the host desk.
Thank you, Olivia. Just about under 31 minutes to the opening of today's 45-minute launch window. After Peregrine 1 today, Astrobotic will deliver another payload for us, and that's our Viper rover later this year. Right now, teams across NASA are busy working on Viper, another important lunar delivery. Viper is short for Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover. But what are volatiles, and why is NASA looking for them? Volatiles are substances that easily evaporate, and one of the most important volatiles NASA is trying to map on the moon is water. Water is critical for deep space exploration because you can drink it, but also turn it into oxygen for breathing and hydrogen for fuel. NASA has selected Astrobotic for Viper's lunar delivery under CLPS, or the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. And when Viper gets to the moon, it will search for ice on and under the lunar surface near the moon's south pole. About the size of a small car, it has a drill and 3 science instruments. Together, they will work to uncover how frozen water got on the moon in the first place and what has kept it preserved over billions of years. This mission will help NASA understand the environment where we plan to send astronauts as part of its Artemis program, which will establish a long-term presence on the moon and eventually Mars. That's your Artemis Moon Minute. Our next Artemis mission is Artemis 2, which will send 4 astronauts around the moon. And work is already well underway on their ride, NASA's Space Launch System rocket. Right now, teams here at Kennedy are processing segments of the 2 side boosters. Each booster will stand about 17 stories tall and burn approximately 6 tons of propellant every second, producing 3.6 million pounds of thrust. Now, we still have 3 more NASA payloads to tell you about, flying on NASA's first commercial lunar payload services launch. But now we want to turn the broadcast over to ULA. Amanda Sterling will walk us through the rest of the Vulcan rocket's inaugural flight through launch and ascent. And then Olivia and I will be back around 15 minutes after liftoff to continue monitoring Peregrine. ULA will join us in just a few seconds.
On board the Vulcan rocket today is Astrobotic's Peregrine commercial lunar lander. Peregrine is the first spacecraft in NASA's new CLPS initiative to have American companies send its science experiments to the moon.
Flight control, LC.
Go ahead, this flight control.
Reduce Vulcan hydraulics to standby.
Roger.
Today's rocket includes the American flag across the inner stage, as well as logos on the payload fairing representing ULA, Vulcan, and Astrobotic. While this is the inaugural launch of the Vulcan rocket, the CERT-1 flight test marks ULA's 159th launch. Let's learn more about this innovative new rocket.
Designed by ULA's engineering team and built by our skilled technicians, the Vulcan rocket, once fully stacked, stands 202 feet and weighs nearly 1.5 million pounds fully fueled. Vulcan's first stage is built using lightweight, machined and bump-pressed orthogrid aluminum panels to form the liquid propellant tanks. Once formed, tanks are joined together using circumferential friction stir welding before heading to the paint booth. Prior to mating to the booster, the BE-4 engines are individually hot-fired. At the base of the rocket is the Vulcan booster, powered by twin BE-4 engines. For additional thrust at liftoff, solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, are attached to the rocket. Atop the booster is ULA's ultra-thin stainless steel Centaur upper stage, powered by 2 RL-10C engines. Spacecraft are encapsulated inside a protected 5.4-meter diameter payload fairing. With production complete, the rocket travels from the ULA factory in Alabama to the launch site in Cape Canaveral on ULA's rocket ship. Once in Florida, ULA's launch operations team begins a series of events leading to today's countdown. The process begins by lifting the 109-foot booster onto the newly constructed Vulcan Launch Platform, or VLP. For missions requiring additional thrust at liftoff, SRBs are attached to the side of the booster. Then, following interstage mate, the Centaur upper stage is transported to the VIF and lifted into position. Lastly, the encapsulated payload fairing is lifted and mated to the Vulcan rocket. Once fully assembled, the launch countdown begins, with moving the rocket from the VIF to the pad. Riding atop the VLP, Vulcan's trip to the pad is about 1/3 of a mile. Weighing in at approximately 2 million pounds, the VLP supports the rocket and contains air conditioning, electrical, and commodities lines. Throughout the 20-minute trip, a support van leads the move, followed by the payload van, providing communication with the spacecraft, while the ground van provides support to the rocket. Track mobiles at the rear power the nearly 3 million pound convoy, which also includes an environmental control system, providing air conditioning to the payload and rocket, as well as a backup generator. With the rocket on the pad, the launch team transitions to fueling and other final preparations.
We remain in the planned 60-minute hold as we continue towards liftoff. In a few moments, launch conductor Dylan Rice will poll the launch team for the final go to pick up the count. 29 engineers and managers are polled for system status and readiness to proceed. This is the final status check for all Vulcan vehicle systems, ground systems, spacecraft, and the U.S. Space Force Eastern Range. The vehicle system readiness poll includes electrical systems, hydraulics, pneumatics, propulsion systems, flight control, and propellants. Let's listen in as Dylan Rice performs the final polling.
Prior to the status check.
L-minus 10 minutes.
Status check to proceed with terminal count, Vulcan systems, propulsion.
Go.
Hydraulics.
Go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
LNG.
Go.
LO2.
Go.
Water.
Go.
Centaur systems, propulsion.
Go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
LO2.
Go.
LH2.
Go.
Has gas.
Go.
Electrical systems, airborne.
Go.
Ground.
Go.
Facility.
Go.
RFFTS.
Go.
Flight control.
Go.
GC cubed.
Go.
Operation support.
Go.
COM.
Go.
Umbilicals.
Go.
ECS.
Go.
Red line monitor.
Go.
Quality.
Go.
Op safety manager.
Go.
ULA safety officer.
Go.
Vehicle system engineer.
Go.
Anomaly chief.
Go.
Range coordinator.
Clear to proceed.
Launch director.
You have permission to launch.
Proceeding with the count. ALC. Verify T0 is set for 071838 Zulu.
Verified.
Polling is complete and the team is go for launch. From T-minus 7 minutes until liftoff, you'll hear Dylan Rice and the team performing the final steps in the countdown procedure. Several critical activities occur in the final minutes before launch, including verifying fuel tank levels and pressures in the booster and Centaur, and arming the flight termination system. At T-minus 1 minute, the Range Operations Commander confirms the range is in a green condition for launch. At T-minus 25 seconds, you'll hear Go Vulcan, Go Centaur, Go Peregrine. This is the final status check of rocket and payload readiness. At T-minus 7 seconds, ROFI sparklers will ignite, followed a second later by initiation of the launch pad water deluge system. At T-minus 3 seconds, the main engines ignite. Then, after seeing Vulcan's first ever liftoff from Slick 41, you'll begin hearing flight commentator Rob Gannon providing launch vehicle ascent data. This is Vulcan Mission Control at T-minus 7 minutes and holding. We anticipate releasing the hold in just a few moments.
On my mark, the time will be T-minus 7 minutes and counting. 3, 2, 1, mark. 6:55.
Ground pyros enabled.
The countdown clock has resumed, and we are go for launch at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern. After liftoff, ULA's Vulcan rocket will head east from Space Launch Complex 41. Here's a look at today's ascent.
Following final confirmation of rocket and payload readiness, 2 GEM 63XL solid rocket boosters and twin BE-4 engines produced more than 1.7 million pounds of thrust to lift ULA's Vulcan rocket away from Cape Canaveral's Space Launch Complex 41. Shortly after liftoff, the rocket begins a pitchover to attain the proper flight path while minimizing the dynamic pressure it experiences during flight. Vulcan then reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound. With the ability to add 2, 4, or 6 solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, Vulcan can be precisely configured to take any mission to space, from low Earth orbit to Pluto and beyond. These boosters augment the rocket's total thrust at liftoff, adding approximately 460,000 pounds of thrust per SRB. With their propellant expired approximately 90 seconds into ascent, the SRBs burn out, followed by jettison. Jettison time is variable, occurring between 100 and 150 seconds after liftoff, depending on mission requirements. Vulcan's guidance system then activates to steer towards the precise target in space. First stage flight continues as the rocket crosses the Kármán line, entering space. With the majority of propellant expended as Vulcan fights against the force of gravity, the BE-4 engines shut down, and the booster stage separates. With the rocket now weighing less than 10% of what it did at liftoff, dual RL-10C engines on ULA's Centaur upper stage ignite. Spacecraft are encapsulated inside a 5.4-meter diameter payload fairing, which provides a protective environment during ascent. Following Centaur engine ignition, the payload fairing is jettisoned. With the first burn complete, the Centaur engine shuts down for a coast phase. Centaur flies a short, medium, or long coast, which is determined by launch day. Further into flight, Centaur ignites for a second burn, powering the vehicle into a translunar injection orbit. Following the second main engine cutoff, ULA Centaur places Astrobotic's Peregrine lunar lander into a highly elliptical orbit, more than 220,000 miles above Earth, where it will intercept the Moon. Following delivery of the Peregrine spacecraft, Centaur comes alive for a third and final burn to reach a heliocentric orbit around the Sun. Centaur completes the CERT-1 mission by carrying Celestis' Memorial spaceflight payload into deep space. Known as the Enterprise flight, this mission includes 234 flight capsules containing cremated remains, DNA samples, and messages of greetings from clients worldwide on an endless journey in interplanetary space beyond the Earth-Moon system to orbit the Sun forever.
$249. STS internal. $238. $230.
TLO2 PLP started.
$159.
Vehicle internal.
T-minus 2 minutes. The launch vehicle, payload, ground systems, and eastern range are go for launch. For those of you just joining, I'm Amanda Sterling, and I'm your host for today's live coverage of the inaugural Vulcan rocket launch. The team is not working any issues, and we're on track for an on-time liftoff at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
STS arm.
T-minus 1 minute.
Brain green.
45. We'll take us at 3.
30. E4 start off to go.
Check. Go. Go Centaur. Go here. 15. 10.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. We have ignition. And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the Moon and beyond.
Stop. 2 good SRBs, hitting peak pressure on the SRBs. Everything looking good. And we've got pitching out programs in, coming into normal rates for that event. We have good hydraulic pressure on both engines. Good chamber pressure on both engines, everything looking good.
Coming up on 60 seconds into the flight, everything looking good. Two good engines, two good SRBs. Body rates look good, nice and smooth. And we've got our first throttle point in the BE4s, everything looking good. And we passed through Mach 1, we're now supersonic, coming up on max Q. We're at max dynamic pressure, everything looking good, we're rolling off on the SRBs. And we have cutoff on the SRBs, coming up on jettison in approximately 30 seconds. 15 seconds SRB jet, BE4s continue to operate nominally. Seeing expected PU activity on the booster mains. And we have separation of both SRBs, everything looking good, BE4s continue to operate normally. Coming up on 2 minutes into the mission, we are now 17 miles in altitude.
We just heard confirmation of solid rocket booster jettison. We have about 3 minutes until we reach our next mission event, booster engine cutoff.
And we see booster PU correcting towards a nominal MR, everything looking good. Chill down, and we have cutoff. Coming up on Vulcan Centaur separation. We have Vulcan Centaur separation. Everything looking good. Coming up on the Centaur phase. And experiencing a bit of data loss here. We've recovered the data. It's like Centaur engines are up and running normally, good steady state pressure, and we've just jettisoned the payload fairing. 2 good brake wires.
We are now less than 10 minutes away from Peregrine separation, so let's get back over to the ULA team and Amanda Sterling to take us through that.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks to those of you who are still following mission progress of ULA's Vulcan Cert-1 flight. For those who are just tuning in, I'm Amanda Sterling, and I'm here at ULA's Advanced Spaceflight Operations Center at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. ULA's inaugural Vulcan rocket lifted off on its first flight test at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern, and all systems continue to operate nominally.
1 minute, 1 second burn. And we've begun pressurizing the propellant tanks in preparation for second burn. Coming up on LH2 pre-start. LH2 pre-start.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 43 minutes, 8 seconds. Coming up next is the second main engine start of ULA's Centaur upper stage. Let's listen in.
Change to the start position, everything looking good. About 15 seconds to mess. We have ignition, full thrust. 2 good engines. Everything looking good.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 43 minutes, 57 seconds. As we approach Peregrine separation, let's learn more about the first spacecraft to launch in NASA's new CLIPS initiative to have American companies send its science experiments to the moon.
Astrobotic is a full-service lunar company. It starts with our terrestrial testing and development services that can build propulsion systems and test propulsion systems on Earth, to the sensors that make precision landing possible, to our rovers that will deploy down on the surface of the moon, to one day our power systems that will deploy on the moon and provide sustaining power for the infrastructure on the surface. Astrobotic is in all of those businesses, and we are in the business of making space accessible to the world, and the moon is just the beginning. The big thing that we're known for is our 2 lunar missions to go to the surface of the moon. Our first one is about to launch, and our second one flies in 2024. The Peregrine mission is important because it's among the first commercial missions to return to the surface of the moon. This is the first time as a nation going back since Apollo. It's the first time for 6 nations that could land on the surface of the moon with our mission. This is the dawn of a new era of affordable, routine, regular access to the surface. What that means is our nations and world scientists can access the moon on a routine, regular basis. They don't have to wait for the culmination of their career for one single super mission. They can go back again and again and again. It's the beginnings of learning about the resources on the surface of the moon, and potentially one day turning those resources into something that we can use in space, and maybe one day return back here to Earth.
Peregrine's development was a years-long process that included many people, like engineers, welders, and technicians, who designed and built the spacecraft. Landing a spacecraft on the moon is very complex. The team worked long hours to get Peregrine to the launch pad.
To be on the pad today with our spacecraft strapped to a giant 200-foot tall launch vehicle ready to blast into the heavens it's a little surreal. It's a moment I've been dreaming about for 16 years. And to see it all on one rocket, it's terrifying and exciting and thrilling all at once.
Our Peregrine lunar lander starts its journey to the moon in Florida on a Vulcan launch vehicle. That will blast us into translunar injection, heading us straight out to the moon, where we will enter lunar orbit and start our descent down to the surface. At this point, engines are firing, all eyes are tuned in, and as we soft touch down on the surface of the moon, that marks the beginning of our surface operations and our payloads deploying. As a nation and as a company, as individuals, we all persevere to overcome challenges, and we're going to continue to do that. And this first mission is just our first step, our first attempt to make space accessible to the world, and it certainly will not be our last.
Pressures.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 47 minutes 8 seconds. We're a few seconds from the second main engine cutoff. Here's Rob Gannon.
30 seconds to nominal MECO. Seconds. And we're going to open loop on PU. Coming up on cutoff. We have cutoff. Everything is looking good. And we are now in a 2-minute 49-second coast phase of spacecraft separation. And we've got full settling going after MECO. And we're reorienting to spacecraft sub-attitude. And continue to maneuver to our MES-2 attitude. And we're inside a minute and a half to spacecraft separation. Body rates are nulling out. And this mission does call for a roll spin for spacecraft separation of 0.5 degree per second. We'll be starting that maneuver shortly.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 50 minutes 10 seconds. Vulcan has executed all mission events expected, and we are now approaching delivery of the Astrobotic Peregrine commercial lunar lander into a highly elliptical orbit, more than 220,000 miles above Earth, to intercept the moon. Let's return to flight commentator Rob Gannon as we approach separation.
We are spinning down. And we are now in a 28-minute coast period to third burn of Centaur.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 51 minutes, 6 seconds. We just heard confirmation of Peregrine spacecraft separation. I'm now back with ULA President and CEO Tori Bruno. Tori, our first Vulcan rocket just delivered its first payload to orbit. How are you feeling?
Yeehaw! I am so thrilled. I can't tell you how much.
Absolutely. And again, we're not completely done with the mission here today. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
I am so proud of this team. Oh my gosh, this has been years of hard work. So far, this has been an absolutely beautiful mission back to the moon and off to our next burn, where we will do our final payload deployment to that heliocentric orbit for the memorial. Our team has done such a good job. Bravo, Zulu to everyone. This is just, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that too. So again, thank you so much for joining us on our show. Congratulations, and we'll let you get back to finish the rest of the mission.
Congratulations to you. Give me a hug. All right.
Minutes, 40 seconds. We're going to pass the broadcast back to the NASA team to continue mission coverage. We'll be joining back in as we approach the final engine burn. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Amanda, and well done, ULA team. So throughout the broadcast, we have been telling you about the 5 NASA payloads that are flying on this mission. We've shown you in depth 3 of them, and now we have the final 2. So NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center has 2 payloads aboard today's flight, and one of those is the Peregrine Ion Trap Mass Spectrometer, aka PITMAS. Its job is to understand the release and movement of lunar surface volatiles like water.
My name is Barbara Cohen. I am the principal investigator, or the lead of the science team, for the Peregrine Ion Trap Mass Spectrometer. PITMAS, the instrument I work on, is going to inform our understanding of the volatile cycle on the moon. That is water, carbon dioxide, methane, all sorts of fun molecules that we want to measure on the surface of the moon and in the lunar exosphere. So we are trying to learn about the water at the poles by going back to where it comes from, to the solar wind and micrometeorites that are coming in now, and understanding how much is there now, how much could be there in the future, how much was there in the past. We're interested in that atmosphere and what it's made out of, and that's what PITMAS will monitor. The reason it's so important to measure the lunar exosphere is because that is a process that's happening today that includes all of the things we're interested in for human exploration. Our Artemis program is going to the South Pole because there are resources there. If you don't have to bring your water with you, if you can use the water that's there, that saves you a lot of mass going up with your astronauts.
And the 5th and final NASA payload we want to show you is the Laser Retroreflector, or LRA. It's a unique type of mirror used to measure distance, and this is why it's so critical for future missions.
My name is Xiaolui Sang. I'm a LiDAR instrument scientist and also work on other laser instruments. The instrument is a laser retroreflector array. It's a small retroreflector mounted on a shell, on an aluminum shell, support shell. It retroreflects laser light back to where it came from. The purpose is to, number one, to have a fiducial marker, a precise fiducial marker on the lander so that we know exactly where that is on the lunar surface. It serves as a landmark for future missions if you want to go back and land it there. When you shine laser on it and it reflects right back at you, so it doesn't matter which way you're looking at it, and so that will help us to range from orbit to the lander as it passes overhead.
All right, it's now been about 55 minutes since Vulcan and Peregrine lifted off from the space coast of Florida. Let's get back to Olivia and the astrobotic team as they work to confirm acquisition of signal with their spacecraft.
Thanks, Megan. As you saw, we just got confirmation that the Peregrine spacecraft separated from the Vulcan rocket, and now we are waiting to establish a space-to-ground communications connection. We expect for this to take a few more minutes. This connection helps engineers in Astrobotics Mission Control Center pass commands, receive telemetry, and determine the location of Peregrine in space. Peregrine will be utilizing NASA's Deep Space Network, or DSN. They're 34-meter dishes in Australia, Spain, and California. These dishes are the same suite used to communicate with the James Webb Telescope, as well as other historic missions. So our flight director on console, Alex Van Hoven, will be calling out what is happening in Astrobotics Mission Control Center. And now, as we look at Astrobotics Mission Control Center, you can see the rows of our staff all monitoring the spacecraft. In the room today, we have 3 of 6.
This is Mission Control Flight Director announcement. Repeat broadcast, this is Mission Control Flight Director with an announcement. The mission team is still waiting for communications with Peregrine with earliest AOS at 080905 UTC in approximate 2.5 minutes. To repeat, the mission team is still waiting for communication with Peregrine with the earliest AOS expected at 080905 UTC.
And folks, that was Alex Van Hoven, our flight director on console. He is calling out UTC times, or sort of space times, and we're waiting for that acquisition of signal with the Peregrine spacecraft.
Correction, earliest AOS at 0818 UTC. Earliest AOS at 0818 UTC.
Now you can almost see Alex Van Hoven in the back row, right below the eye in Astrobotic. You can kind of see his head. Maybe he'll stand up for us at least one time. We'll see. He's very focused and busy. Today we have 3 of 6 flight directors on console for launch. Once we establish communications with Peregrine and the spacecraft officially begins its journey towards the moon, the flight directors will work in shifts so there is always one present in mission control. I would ask them to all give a wave, but they're definitely laser focused on their screens, checking up on the spacecraft. Now Alex, he's giving us those live updates, and he is also senior aerospace engineer, and he oversaw the development of Peregrine's in-flight procedures. He developed his flight expertise as part of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
Broadcast Mission Control Flight Director announcement. I repeat, broadcast Mission Control Flight Director announcement. At this time, Astrobotic has confirmed that we have established communications with Peregrine, and we are now receiving live telemetry. I repeat, we have just established communications with DSN and can confirm that we are receiving telemetry from the satellite.
Now confirming, my goodness, we have received signal with the Peregrine spacecraft, and we are communicating it with it here on Earth. You just heard it from Alex. The team will begin sending commands to Peregrine to continue its journey to the lunar surface. What an incredible day. Now, thank you so much for continuing to tune in with us to watch this historic launch of Astrobotic's Peregrine lunar lander on its journey to the moon. I'm Olivia Chapla with Astrobotic, and it is such a happy day for Astrobotic. I'm kind of speechless. So back to Megan at the hostess. Thank you very much.
Hey, congratulations, Olivia. I know that must have been really nerve-wracking to see such a big moment and it being finally here. So congratulations to her and the rest of the team. And actually right now here with me, I have Andy Jones, and he is the Director of Landers and Spacecraft for Astrobotic. And Andy, I saw you were over off the camera, but I saw you go, yes, as soon as we confirmed acquisition of signals. So talk us through that. How are you feeling?
Relieved. More than anything else, relieved. I mean, getting communication is just so important to everything else we want to try and do. So now I can start enjoying the moment, enjoying the excitement of getting to space.
Yeah, at least you didn't have to wait long. You know, there was a window, right? We got it right at the beginning of the possible window.
So just a credit to all the great work the team has done to actually get it, to acquire it so fast.
Yeah.
It's just a brilliant set of machine, brilliant people working on it, so
yeah,
very proud.
Yeah, what would you say to the team? You know, again, I know that you guys have been working on this for years. What would you say to them as it culminates in this moment right now?
Get back to work. No.
Not even going to give them a break. Okay, we're hard-working folks at Astrobotic, guys.
No, extremely proud. The team should be extremely proud of themselves. It's been a fast road, a lot of setbacks, a lot of ups, lots of downs. The team took everything in their stride and, as you can see, achieved remarkable things. So proud of everybody, what they've done. Inspirational to everybody.
Yeah. And what's next for Astrobotic and NASA? You know, it seems like we're going back to the moon for a second time, huh?
It is. So once obviously successful completion of this mission, we have Griffin, which takes the Viper rover to the moon late 2024. Following that, we have as early as 2026 tipping point, where we do a demonstration of power transmission across the lunar surface. And also Astrobotic is part of the national team led by Blue Origin to take humans back to the moon. And we're part of the cargo lander system for that.
So a lot of things to look forward to.
Lots to look forward to, yeah.
And just one last question for you. I mean, just what do you think of this new initiative that NASA has to really bring in all of these small U.S. companies to hopefully help us all go back to the moon?
This initiative is incredibly important. It allows a small company like Astrobotic to actually deliver a lander to the moon. We'd have never been able to achieve it without that. But the best thing is it's bringing a lot more creative minds, new thinking to the table, and that will help us accelerate the technologies needed to get us back to the moon and have a robust resource and presence on the moon. So the more, it's very important for us to be there, and it's just helping us get there much faster.
Andy, thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
And that's going to do it for us here at Kennedy Space Center. Thank you for sharing in the excitement of NASA's first CLIPS launch. Now on its own, the Peregrine spacecraft will coast for an expected arrival at the moon on February 23rd. And coverage of that landing, one of the first U.S. landings on the moon in over 50 years, that will be broadcast on NASA TV and NASA Plus. For those of you watching on ULA platforms, the ULA version of the simulcast will continue in a few moments as they await another milestone in this inaugural Vulcan flight. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We leave you now with a final look at today's historic launch.